All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Planning 101. We have quite a few online tonight, and we have a pretty good group here in the room as well. It's a really great opportunity for us to learn together about planning, this function in the community that we do together, essentially. Counselors as planning authority and the planning staff as your advisors. So some of you are going to be new to planning, and that's great. And some of you, we always need fresh ideas and fresh faces. And some of you are going to be pretty well versed in this, and you've seen like every application type that there is, and lots of different circumstances unfold on various different types of applications. And so I'm going to encourage all of you, new or experienced, to share your insights as we go along, because it just makes the learning environment a little bit richer. And that's the whole purpose of tonight, is to provide some opportunity for learning. So the slides are going to be available to you after the fact too. There's some reference material in here that you might want to pick up on after the fact. So if we could have that first slide. There we go. All right, so my name is Sally. I'm the manager of planning for Perth County. And we have quite a bit of our staff here tonight, which I'm going to introduce to you as we go at a certain point in time. We're going to talk a little bit tonight about what is planning, what's it all about actually, and what is the public interest, and how is that different from what is from public engagement. They are slightly different terms and mean slightly different things. We're going to have some opportunity to get to know the staff a little bit. And we're going to talk about the policy regime in Ontario and some of the mechanics of development review and development applications, things you might be familiar with: zoning, official plan amendments, and land division, things like severances. And so I'm going to encourage you to ask questions as we go. You don't have to say them until the end. And for those of you online, please use the chat. And Sean and Tyler will help me monitor that to make sure that we answer your questions sort of as close to the subject matter as we can. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is planning sort of more generally. Planning as an exercise is really about sort of coordinating development and growth in an area. And we set about a direction on how to do that within our official plan documents and their hierarchy and the zoning bylaw. And within that framework, people bring forward their ideas for new businesses or new neighborhoods, etc. So in considering that context, what do you think a healthy community looks like to you? And I'm asking you to provide some answers here. So interact with me a little bit on what does a full or complete or healthy community mean to you? And there's really like no wrong answers here. So, and if you're online, you can put them in the chat or raise your hand perhaps. Anybody in the room have any you may want to throw up and see? Yeah.
I like to be close to services like hospital, the Y, shopping, groceries, all of that. I mean, I don't mind traveling out, but I do like to shop locally.
For sure. Anybody else? A healthy community. What are some of the things you need in your area in order to thrive?
Opportunities to get outside and be in nature, even if you're in an urban setting.
Yeah, perhaps recreation generally too. Outdoor opportunities, as you're suggesting, arenas, community centers, things, tennis courts, things of that nature. Anybody else? Oh, online here. We have people feel a sense of belonging, so inclusivity, being able to see themselves and having opportunities for all. What else have we got online here? Opportunities for engaging community members from all walks of life. Places to live and work and play. Yep. Anybody else? Anybody else in the room here?
Good volunteers, people who want to be engaged in your community.
Yeah. It's this notion of service and it being useful, like a good way to feel good about yourself and to offer to other people in your community, a good way to be in relationship with people. So many of the things you've said, in fact, all the things you've said could find themselves in one of these three circles, if you will, in the Venn diagram.
Or a couple more.
Thriving local businesses, we might find that one in the economic circle, for instance. Safety, we might find that in the social circle as another example. So what I wanted to point out here was that community means a lot of different things. A healthy community means a lot of different things. And for the most part, you can find those things in one of these circles or in maybe the area between the circles. So for an example, where would you put something like the provision of clean drinking water or roads? Where might you find that in this diagram? Environmental? Does anyone have a different view of where you might find that? Perhaps if you're a municipal councillor, you might find that in the economic circle as well, and the efficient use of funds. Right smack dab in the middle of each. That's fantastic. And that's where we're going with this concept, is that all of these things matter very much to a healthy community. And so the objective here is to do planning in a way where all three of these things can be represented. And in fact, what we find in this profession of planning is that really what it comes down to is that good planning happens here in the intersection of all, which was noted by one of the folks online. So we'll talk about planning, and we'll talk about really good planning is what we're aiming for. So when I say planning, that's really what I mean. The intersection of all these things being really the crux of the matter, and that when we make planning decisions, we want to mirror all of these interests in setting up that new policy or in the decision that's made about a development proposal. So the planner's role, and many of them are here tonight, is to be consistently focused on that centerpiece, consistently focused on what are all of the public interests and how can we come to a place where the majority or as much of it is achieved as possible. And our job then is to bring that perspective to you in making decisions on planning applications. So the objectives then for us to do our work together would be to keep in mind that communities be safe and enjoyable, that they be prosperous, that they represent the community values in different circles, that we're preserving our resources that we find naturally here in Perth County. We have a significant amount of primary land here. It makes up most of the county. We have a finite amount of aggregates. That's the double G there, AGG. And so we need to really be careful about how we protect and use those, protect them for use essentially. And we also have natural environment here, which produces a lot of public goods. So we do need to keep all of these three things in mind when we're doing planning. And also, and finally, consider the needs of future generations. And that's a pretty big task. We don't know exactly what they're going to need in the future, but we have a sense. And so where these three things interact is our best chance really of considering the needs of future generations. So go to the next slide. Planning is largely a municipal function, and that's why we're here tonight to talk about our work together in this avenue. And in Perth County, that involves both the upper tier and the lower tiers working at it together. And each tier has different authority for different parts of the planning process. The planning authority really is delegated to municipalities from the province, and it's delegated to the local council or the county council for the most part. There's a few exceptions, and we will cover those when we get to the different types of planning applications. And planning in Ontario comes with a regime. It involves the Planning Act and the provincial policy statement, providing us the process, the regulation and the tasks associated with doing good planning. And then we have a whole array of other subject matters that are provided to us in terms of regulation through a number of different acts. So this is a pretty big list of stuff. So how are we supposed to keep track of it all as municipalities? and make sure that we're considering the appropriate pieces on an individual application. And so really that's where your planners come in. So in Perth County, we coordinate the planning service through one department, and that's at the county. But we serve both tiers and provide you with advice and a process on different planning applications. And for the most part, the planners work out of the local offices. So they're in the communities on a regular basis. They're working with the staff in the various departments and getting a sense of what's happening locally when reviewing an individual planning application. This wasn't always the case necessarily that the service was provided by one department at the county. And so it's important that we talk about, for a short time at least, the rebuild of the service that we did together in 2020. So the two tiers, the CAOs and mayors got together and developed a charter. And that charter had 10 principles of what a good planning service would look like in it. And we used that charter to together build a new planning service model for Perth County. And so we arrived at that in 2020. It took us a good chunk of the year, and we launched that service in March of 2021. So that was the kickoff. And it's provided to the lower tiers and to county council through a 5-year service agreement, which started in 2021. So the principles that we built this service model on, I like to group into 3 categories. They're culture, service, and commitment. So I'm going to review them a little bit with you now. From a culture perspective, it's about solution-focused approaches. So what does that mean? It means working with developers and landowners to try and figure out how their interests, the thing that they want to build or the thing that they want to do, could coexist with other things in the vicinity. So how do we explain the various public interests with them? How do we collect information in order to evaluate those public interests and then build those things into the design of their development and their idea so that both things can coexist? The next one, customer service excellence, is really about being kind to one another. It's about helping people understand the process, because many people don't do this on a regular basis. I know, like, before I became a planner, I didn't know anyone in my family or any of my friends who had ever done a zoning bylaw amendment or a severance application. So it's not something that everybody does often, and they do need support to get through the process. So it's really about meeting them where they're at and figuring out what they need to get through the various stages. And then engagement with council and staff. So develop a rapport with one another and make sure that we have opportunities to discuss things as we go. Questions get answered, insights are revealed, and we just continue to share information. The next category, service, is sort of from a mechanic's point of view, that all of the planners that are providing you advice are keeping up on current trends in planning, new techniques, that we're using best practices and keeping our professional development up to date, that we deploy resources that are specific to the task. So essentially, planners are doing planning, admin folks are doing admin, and we're using the resources that we have to do planning as efficiently as possible, and aim for cost recovery on development. So the development essentially pays for development. So when an application comes forward, that the work that we do on that stuff is covered by the fees for making an application. And the last category is demonstrated commitment. And the things that were identified here that matter to all 4 councils and the 2 county council is that the municipalities' needs are different than a developer's needs. They're different than the public's needs sometimes. And we have to be knowledgeable about how to implement some of the plans once they're or applications once they're passed, and that the priorities within municipalities change over time, and that we need to be really continuing to listen to each other to know what those are, and asking, hey, what's matters, the most in this community, in this municipality for the next year, do you see? And so I do make rounds and ask that question on a semi-annual basis. And that we continue to know what our shared objectives are and key project milestones. So we're keeping each other informed. A commitment to contribution to community issues. And this is something that we all in the department take pretty seriously and find that we always want to have more time available to this stuff. The obvious examples these days are affordable housing and intensification of our serviced areas. But there's many other examples too. And I just briefly mentioned performance monitoring and accountability. So that we do spend time twice a year to go around to each lower tier and ask, is the service meeting your needs? Have there been things that have worked well that we could celebrate together? Have there been things that need improvement on? And I will say that it has been an evolution, because starting in 2021 and with council support to staff up, we developed a procedure manual to cover all the tasks with each different type of planning application and really try to streamline it as we were writing that document. And we worked with staff at the lower tiers too, because there's a lot of processes that they do, like circulating notices and running meeting agendas and public meetings, that we need to be working together. So Michelle coordinated that project and really worked with folks from each municipality to get it all really nailed down. So there's no question now who's supposed to do what timeline is it supposed to occur on. And once they finish their piece, where does it go next? Who to send it to? Oops. I want to go back one. So as I said, continuous improvement, and it has been an evolution that I think has gone fairly fast given the development pressures. It's hard to get a new staff up and running in a short order, but these guys have really stepped up because we didn't have much choice. The community needed development review that was happening as quickly and as efficiently as possible, given the different pressures that we've seen over the last couple of years. So it's going to continue to evolve. And I know, working in it and talking to many of the staff lower tiers, that it is continually improving, and we're finding ways to do it more efficiently all the time. So we're going to move into talking and getting to know each of the planners. We have a team of 8 plus a student that we bring in a student every year. Last year we had a PhD student from Guelph who was quite helpful on a number of ongoing projects that we had to do. And we've been shifting to a different model where we try and find that graduate student who can come for like an 8-month period and be with us part-time rather than an intensive summer period. Because we find that it just serves the needs and the projects that we have ongoing a little better. So tonight we have everybody here except for one. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves to you, and we'll shift the camera a little bit so the folks online can see them as well. We're going to start with John and Jerica, who currently serve North and West Perth as a team.
Should we stand up?
Yeah,
I guess we'll stand up.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, thank you.
And the camera's here.
Oh, the camera's there. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name's Jerica. I use they, them pronouns. If you'd like to address me formally, Planner Gilbert's fine, or I'm happy going by Jerica. I grew up in a farm in Middlesex County, just next door. I spent the first few years of my planning journey in Northern Ontario, where I learned a lot of things very quickly. But for those of you who haven't been up north, it's a lot of rock. Very pretty rocks, but I really miss kind of that feeling of home, of pastures, and especially cows. I never thought I would miss a cow growing up, but so I'm very happy to join the team in Perth County. It's so fantastic working alongside you guys, and I'm very excited to work with the new council. So thank you.
Thanks, Jerica. Appreciate that. My name is John Bice. I grew up in Stratford. So I know the area pretty well, family in Mitchell, and I currently live in Mitchell. So I know the West Perth area pretty good. Like Sally mentioned, Jarek and I take care of North and West Perth for planning review, as well as inquiries and everything else that pops up. But I did my undergrad at the University of Waterloo in the planning program there. I had an extensive run at a bunch of co-op opportunities that came up anywhere between Niagara region to Ministry of Transportation. I'm currently doing my master's at UW as well. And that's it for me. Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys. All right. So on our Perth East and Perth South team, we have Melissa and Pune. Pune is not able to join us tonight, but Pune has a young family and she lives in London. And she comes to us from the development side of things. So she did a lot of planning as the representative of the developers in her past work. So Melissa, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. My name is Melissa Gassick, and I'm a planner working for the county, covering, Sally has said, Perth East and Perth South. And before that, I was in the city of Windsor, where I handled quite a large number of development applications, numerous site plan applications. And before that, in various other capacities in the town of Oakville and town of Caledon. And before that, which seems like a different life altogether, I was in the design world and working for a number of design firms and architectural firms. So my background is very much urban, like from an urban setting, urban development, and this is all new to me, but I like it. It's a change of pace, but the same principles apply in this setting, and I'm happy to help out and happy to meet you all. Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa. Susanna's up next. Susanna's our senior planner and sort of roves for us right now, providing a lot of mentorship and oversight across all four tiers, or all four municipalities rather, which I find is a really critical function for us. It helps us to build consistency across the municipalities, and I'll turn it over to you, Susanna, to go from there.
Hi, good evening, everybody. My name is Susanna Reed, and I am serving as a senior planner, and it's an honor. I got to say, it's an honor to be working at the Perth County Planning Department and with my colleagues and working on community development across the county. My mother's family is from the Fullerton ward of West Perth, and I lived in Fullerton Township for 10 years before it amalgamated with the municipality of West Perth, at which point I completed a master's degree in planning at the University of Guelph, and then I moved to Huron County. So I come from Huron County Planning and joined the Perth County Planning Department in 2001. So it's almost been 2 years. And so my background is, I'd say, the opposite of Melissa's, is when we're like reviewing the vast number of plans and subdivisions and site plan applications. Like, I think in Huron County, I might have done 3 site plan applications in 14 years. So it's the scale of development is much faster than when we were seeing in Huron County when I was there. And I understand that the rate of development has increased in Huron County since I left. So I'm really excited, like Jerica says, to work with all of you and all the counselors that are joining us virtually. And I'm proud to be part of the department.
Thanks, Susanna. Online, I think we may have Stephanie. You guys see her on there?
Tried bringing her over earlier, but try again here.
Okay. So Stephanie Van is online, and
She'll be on in a second.
okay. So Stephanie works exclusively on the new official plan and is also a planner on our team. And I'll let her introduce herself. There she is.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Sally. Sorry for the delay. Like Sally said, I'm Stephanie. I work on the official plan review. I came from working with the province at MNRF, working with their land claims and treaty section, mainly working on the Algonquin land claim. Official plan review is a little bit new to me, but it's a really exciting project that I'm excited to be part of. And like everyone said, just really excited to be part of this team.
Thanks, Stephanie. And Michelle is in the room here tonight as well. Michelle coordinates all the files that are being reviewed. She develops all the notices. She does the land division secretary duties and issues certificates on the completed consent conditions and many, many, many other things. Michelle keeps us all very organized. So Michelle, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michelle Evans. As Sally said, I'm the land division and planning clerk for the county. It's also very new. Only been here just over a year. I live in Stratford, was raised in a couple different municipalities in Perth County. And I came from a social services not-for-profit background, so planning is still new to me. And I've been here a year. I'm still learning every day. I think that's it.
Thanks, Michelle.
You seem like you've been here much longer than you're organized.
Yeah. And myself, as I said, I manage the team. Some of the approval authority is delegated to me for very minor or uncontentious items. Review the work of the team and coordinate our service agreement with all of you, and various tasks for the organization for Perth County, like budgeting. I'm working largely on the OP these days with Stephanie. And what's really, I guess, a little bit about myself personally, I come from Huron County. I farm in Perth County with my husband and two business partners there. We're raising kids in North Perth. My background in planning, or my education background, is agriculture science, and then went on to study planning at Guelph. And I worked in Huron County for a number of years and Chatham-Kent for a couple of years. So decided to come back to this area for an opportunity to farm, and found myself here as well. So it's been a great journey. And what's really unique about our planning team, I think, if you might find this at other planning teams across the province, but what's unique about this group of folks is that there's a lot of newness going on, and they're functioning at a pretty exceptional level, given that they are new to each other. New to Perth County, and in some cases new to municipal planning. So planning has a number of different pathways or disciplines that you might choose to go down in this profession, and municipal planning is one of them, and has its own set of things to learn. So it's like I said, we are fairly new. I think everyone still feels a little bit new, but the work is really unfolding. So it's quite a great group to be a part of. If I could go back to my slides, Sean, I would be amiss to not to mention at this stage the amount of support that planning, and not a department, but planning for this community gets from staff at the lower tiers and staff in the other departments around the county as well. We work pretty closely with clerks and finance folks. We also work really closely with public works, fire, and building officials. So, like I said at the very beginning, this is something that we're doing together, and our particular role is to advise you. But everyone here tonight, and certainly everyone in the lower tier offices, participates to some degree or another. So this just gives you the list of folks. We're all available. You can find all our contact information on the planning webpage too at the Perth County site. And there's photos there for, I think, almost all of us. We're still just finishing off updating it. In case you forget who you're looking for, you can maybe remember by what we look like. Okay, so we're gonna move on to the heart of things. So planning in Ontario. The planning process is really guided by the Planning Act. So a lot of the regulations around how we do planning is found in that act. The provincial policy statement is another document provided by the provincial government that gives a lot of the parameters that we would use to measure or evaluate what is the public interest. It goes through a lot of different categories around efficiency of municipal funds, servicing, water, sewer, storm, natural environment or natural resources and natural hazards. It talks about prime ag lands. It talks about all of the things that we need to keep in mind to really hone in on that focus that we talked about earlier, that center of that Venn diagram. And from those two documents, we have this set of items in blue here: official plans, zoning bylaws, minor variances, site plans, and land division. So we're going to spend the bulk of the next part of this presentation tonight on these blue categories that are outlined in blue here. The official plan for Perth County right now is under review. We're trying to build a new one. But the current plan certainly provides us with the direction that we need to evaluate changes on individual properties, whether that be through a zoning amendment, a minor variance, site plan, or land division. So the official plan really gives that local flavor. It takes the public interest and gives us a little more refinement on what matters most to the folks here in Perth and to our landscape here. And at all times when we're reviewing these various applications, we're referring back to the Planning Act and back to the provincial policy statement, which we call the PPS. So let's dive in and focus on some of these sections in blue a little more. We're going to look first at development application review, and then we're going to talk a little bit about policy development. Those are the two sort of main branches of work that our department does. The development side of things really keeps us hopping and takes the majority of our time. And policy review is also quite important, and we'll get into that a little bit more towards the end. So we're going to start with a bit of an overview. This is sort of how our team conceptualizes the planning process. And we built this little visual aid, so you're not going to find it on a website, but you will find it in these slides when you have them. But essentially there's three phases to a development application. And the first one is sort of before the application is made. And then phase two is the reviewing of the application. And then phase three is implementing whatever decision is made. So we've put different colors in here because the beige color really represents the developer's work, their responsibilities, and the blue or the light gray or green, it represents the municipal responsibilities. And our team and the folks at your municipalities carry through some of these blue stages in phase two. But the decision by the approval authority here is referring to many of you on council. So what I like to point out about this is that we're essentially passing the ball back and forth to one another. It's a conversation that's ongoing from all three phases. So somebody comes along, they have a plan for a new neighborhood or a new industrial area or a new building, and they've got this idea and a design coming together. So they let us know, and then they pass the ball to us and we pick it up and we do a pre-consultation with them. So we work with the folks at the lower tiers to coordinate a meeting, to coordinate the collection of information from all the various public interests, from public works, from fire, et cetera. And then we provide that applicant with insights about what is the public interest, how is your application going to be measured or evaluated, so that they can go and before they submit the application, collect all of the pertinent pieces of information that will justify or put together sort of a picture of how their development can coexist with other things that are in that vicinity. And we rely on that list of legislation to help us determine what that sort of list of homework items for the applicant is. So then we pass the ball back to them and they prepare their submission. And then that can take any amount of time. Sometimes it's quite quick, a few weeks, and sometimes it's several months. It just really depends on their the studies that may be required, or the way that their business is moving or changing, and how they plan to bring that proposal forward in more detail. So they pass the ball back to us when they submit the application, and then we begin a technical and a technical review and an analysis of those public interest pieces. Along the way, we circulate to various agencies, to neighbors of the property, and we collect their insights. We have public meetings, and within those two pieces of this process, we work with the developer again to resolve any questions that might come up from what we're reviewing, the analysis that we're doing, or things that arise from the public. So this is where public engagement comes in. So we seek input from individual folks about how they see this development or how it might impact their property, and we invite them. And we invite them to tell us things that we may not know yet. And it's important that we work with the developer at those stages because they want to be participating in resolving those issues too, or those questions, or proposing different ways that we could address concerns. And the sooner in the process, the better, from my perspective and from the perspective of many developers. And then it's over to our team again to make recommendations. So this is where the advisement piece comes in. When we bring you a recommendation, we do so in the form of a report and a presentation, and it's a two-part scenario. So we're going to outline all of the application details for you, what's being proposed, how it looks, what surrounds it, all of those details. And then the second part is an analysis of the planning rationale, why it should or shouldn't be approved to proceed in its current form. So it's really a two-part recommendation. Well, the recommendation is one part, but we do spend a lot of time just explaining the whole development to you as well. And then the ball is passed over to you as councils, as planning authority, to make some decisions. And you will be offered insights from the whole process to date in making those decisions, and certainly have the prerogative to ask questions. And then provided something is approved, then the ball is passed back over to the applicant, and they go forth to do their implementation. And implementation looks different depending on what type of application it is. So for a zoning bylaw amendment, for instance, the implementation would be the next step is a building permit, most likely. For a severance application, the next step is to go and actually create the lot. So we're going to go through those individually. We're going to start with zoning because I believe it sort of covers a full gamut of how a planning application is reviewed. And then we can sort of build on those ideas with the other application types. So zoning bylaw is essentially a set of maps and a set of details. So the maps tell you, as in this picture, what zone is on a particular property. This one here, institutional. HVR here is Hamlet Village residential. Right beside that is Hamlet Village commercial, and so on. We have some natural environment down here. And the white, anything in white, as you'll with this A, is agriculture. So you use the map as a reference, and then you go to that chapter of the book essentially and find out what are all the permitted uses. And the provisions for building things in that zone. The zoning bylaw is applicable law for the Building Code Act. So that means that the building official must determine if the building that's proposed or the use that's proposed is compliant with zoning before any permits are issued. The zoning bylaw really regulates where you can put buildings on a lot and what you can do, like what kind of uses you can use those buildings and structures for. So this is kind of what a zoning bylaw, oops. Oh, I'm getting a little clicker happy. Just one sec. There. Okay. So this is essentially what a zone looks like in the zoning bylaw. You've got your permitted uses, and in this case, it's a Hamlet Village residential zone. So it's listing all the various types of dwelling units or the different types of dwellings that are permitted within that zone. And then it goes on to give the zoning provisions or zone regulations, talks about frontage, area, the setback from various lot lines, building height, and the amount of open space or landscaping. And there's a reason behind all of these things, of course. And then what I forgot to mention was within the zoning bylaw too, there's a whole suite of provisions for that are called the general provisions, and they regulate things in all zones. So those provisions are applicable in whether it's an agriculture zone or a industrial zone or what have you. So when somebody wants to propose something different than what you see here, so a different type of use, or they need a different height or a different yard setback, then what we're talking about is a zoning bylaw amendment. And so they're typically requested by the property owner, and they will affect only that site, so just the single property. And the zoning bylaw amendment may be to permit a different type of use. It may be to deviate from one of the provisions. And so this is where the applicant or the landowner comes forward and they pass us the ball and they say, we want to build a house on this property and we want to build it closer to this lot line because of X or B. They have their reasons. And so we would set up the pre-consultation and start the ball rolling. The planning authority for the zoning bylaw is the lower tier council. And each zoning bylaw is fairly similar among the 4 municipalities, but there are nuances and unique things built in there. And the one that comes to mind, or I think is most anecdotal, is the permission to keep horses in a residential zone in Millbank. That's not something you're going to find in Listowel or Mitchell. Again, as I mentioned, we'll engage with the public, we'll circulate notices to them, and we work on resolving issues as we go. And then we will bring a recommendation to the council at the lower tier, as I said, identifying all the characteristics of the proposal and then planning recommendation based on public interest and planning principles. And what I also like to point out is that, and I've alluded to it a little bit already, is that during the planning process, the planner is wearing 2 hats, and Michelle facilitates this, and so do a lot of folks at the lower tier as well on staff, is helping that person get through the process. So lots of people we deal with do this on a regular basis. They're developing properties regularly, but lots of folks aren't. And so we do outline how to get from step 1 to step 2 and work with them on that. But we try to be really upfront at the beginning that our role is to help you through the process. And at a certain point, we're also going to be evaluating your work, your proposal. And so we try to be as upfront as possible on when we see issues or when we're not going to be able to write a report that's maybe supportive of all the things that they're proposing, but that we will continue to help them through the process. Is there any questions about zoning or any of the things we've talked about before we move on? Anything online?
It may be good to give a shout out to GIS. So
Great idea.
the map that Sally showed earlier is actually available online. It's interactive. So GIS stands for Geographic Information System. And it's really an amazing tool because all this information is accessible to our communities as well. So people can go and look up the maps for their areas, and there are resources that you guys as counselors can use as well. So, and we have a great GIS team that is very patient with the planning staff because we have a lot of requests for them all the time.
Mm-hmm. And there is a link at the end of the slides to that site and to the planning site. And we encourage you, as you're if you find yourself in here exploring around and you have questions, just reach out to one of us. We are more than happy to facilitate you being engaged in planning. And so we're happy to have questions from you. If there's no question about zoning, we're going to move on to minor variance, I think. So I put this picture up because to me, this is a picture that says it all about minor variances. But does anyone want to tell me what you see in this picture? Anybody online or in the room? This lovely expressive gentleman is telling us a story in this photo, and I want to know what you see. Anybody?
The neighbor's eavesdrop is hanging over the fence.
Yeah, it's awfully close. I don't see much of a yard setback there at all. Yeah. Anything else? Okay, well, the other thing that sticks out to me is that the building on the neighboring lot seems to be of a height that's concerning to this fella. And he's trying to figure out what to do. And what does it mean? And are they allowed to do that? They got a building permit, obviously, right? Like all of these things come to mind when I see this picture. And so a minor variance is really similar in many ways to a zoning bylaw amendment. If we go back to those provisions that we saw, or the list of permitted uses in a zoning bylaw, what a minor variance does is it allows us to look at something, a proposal where some relief is needed from the provisions of the bylaw, or an extension of an expansion on what's currently permitted in that zone. And the landowner in that case wants to know if they could seek relief from that provision. And so the intent of this process is that it's shorter in time. It has a smaller window sort of for public engagement. And it's really meant to be focused on things that are minor changes. So if you have a side yard setback requirement of 1.5 meters, and you have an addition proposed for your house, and it's going to be 1.3 meters, not 1.5, but it really does work for the function of your house, then you could come forward for a minor variance application, and it would take place more quickly than a full zoning amendment. And there's 4 tests that we look at when reviewing a minor variance application. Does the variance meet the general intent and purpose of the official plan? Always referring back to that local guidance on what matters to the community. Does the minor variance maintain the general intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw? So yeah, it's not quite meeting the provision exactly, but is the intention of having a side yard in that example maintained? Is the variance really minor? It's not always a question of math or numbers. Sometimes it's more of a qualitative evaluation. And does the variance facilitate change that's desirable for this type of land use or the land uses in the vicinity? And then the planning authority for this is often a committee of adjustment. And in North Perth, that's a group of appointed citizens. And in the rest of Perth, it's members of council, be that the entire council or a subgroup of council. Any questions about minor variances? Okay. So next up is official plans and official plan amendments. So we haven't fully talked about what an official plan itself is yet, but it's similar in layout to a zoning bylaw amendment. So it's a set of maps and a set of policies that correspond to the different land use types. So this is a picture of the County of Perth official plan map. The different colors on there represent different land uses. And in an official plan, they're referred to as designations, not zones, like a zoning bylaw. And that, if you're interested in what is a pet peeve of a planner, that's it, is one of them anyways, is referring to everything as a zone. Especially when talking about the official plan. So it's a designation. A property may have more than one designation on it, and a designation will butt up against another designation. A good example would be a woodlot on a farm. So the woodlot would have a natural environment designation, and the rest of the property would have an agriculture designation. They're going to meet on the map, but they're not going to overlap. So for each place on the ground, there's one designation. And then when you go to the document, the official plan itself, you'll find a chapter on each one of those different types of land uses. So I've listed some of them for you here. In a settlement area, you're going to find industrial as a designation, and we're shifting to language calling that employment instead of industrial. There's commercial designations, and there's some different types of commercial designations. There's residential designations, and our residential designation, and we're shifting to the language around neighborhoods and really fostering sort of this wholesome more complete community when we talk about neighborhoods. Institutional and open space designation. Those are the types of things you're going to find in a settlement area, a service settlement area. We looked earlier at villages and hamlets. Those have their the designation in those areas is village or hamlet. And then in the countryside, you're going to find designations that reflect what's found on the ground there: agriculture, aggregate, and natural environment. So when we're reviewing a zoning bylaw amendment or a minor variance, we're going into this official plan and we're looking at what is the vision that this community has set for that type of land use. What is the vision that's been set for the other types of land uses that are neighboring this property that we're considering? And it really outlines for us what's the public interest. So we're constantly referring back to that, as well as the PPS and the Planning Act when we review planning, when we review zoning bylaw amendments and minor variances. The other thing that we'll talk about with official plans is amendments. So like a zoning bylaw amendment, somebody may want to come forward and do something on their property that's not specifically outlined in that official plan or in that land use designation that's applied to their property. Typically, amendments are initiated by the landowners unless we need to update a policy or change a policy, and that's referred to as a housekeeping amendment that the municipality or the county would initiate. Same goes for zoning bylaws. But generally speaking, we're talking about amendments that are initiated by the landowners. And it's because they want something else to be permitted that's not currently permitted, because they want to exceed whatever is sort of given in the specific details for the vision of that land use, or they want to change the property to a different designation. The authority for official plan amendments is county council, and a public meeting is held by county council. And it's approved through a bylaw. I forgot to mention zoning bylaw amendments are also approved by bylaw. But what's important about official plan amendments is that even though county council is the approval authority, what the local council may have to offer in terms of insights and interests locally is really valuable. So one of the tasks that our team does is to review that application at the local municipality first. So go and as part of our collection of all the information that the planning authority, in this case, county council, may need to make a good decision, they're going to want to know, it's really important to them, what does the local council think about this application before we make a decision? So we will present at the lower tier, and we're looking in that case for a resolution from that council as to what they might want county council to know before a decision is made. And I think it's a opportunity here to note that that the players in this theater, for instance, the public, the planners, the local council, the upper tier council, we may not all agree on where this thing is going, an amendment or official plan amendment or a zoning bylaw amendment or a severance that we're going to get into, but that's okay. It's really a sign that everyone is engaged and that each group cares. So that's a really good thing. And the important part is to make sure that we're hearing each other, that we're sharing the information, and that it's all part and parcel of the information that's used to make a decision. Before I leave official plans there, I wanted to mention that we also have currently in Perth County 3 other official plans that are in play. And that is specifically on settlement areas of Listowel, Milverton, and Mitchell. So there's an official plan for each one of those towns. And we refer to both official plans when making recommendations and advising you on decision making. In the new official plan that we're currently developing, the idea is to consolidate the county official plan plus those 3 into one document so that it contains all the policies we need to review applications, whether we're in the countryside or in a settlement area or in a hamlet or village. Okay. We're going to move into land division, but I want to first check if there's any questions and give everyone a chance to just stretch a little bit, because planning has been known to be boring sometimes.
Is there a reason why there's three official, like the Milverton has one, Mitchell has one, and Bristol has one, and then there's an overarching one?
It's a great question, and I don't think any of us have been around long enough to know the answer as to why it went that direction. I'm sure there's folks on the virtual platform or perhaps in the room that might know the answer to that question.
Probably goes back to the 1900s. When we first settled, I think. You have to check the history books, but it's been around forever.
Yeah, I couldn't pinpoint exactly why. Is there somebody on there who wants to answer?
Councilor Ron Wells.
Okay.
Alan, well, yeah.
Yes, hello, everyone from North Perth. So the county official plan was adopted by County Council in 1998, or actually in 1997, just prior to amalgamations happening. And at the time, the focus was on developing one official plan for all the former 11 townships, and that the 3 urban areas of Listowel, Mitchell, and Milverton would continue on with their official plans, with the understanding at some point it would be consolidated into one official plan, which is obviously in process right now. So the intent was that they would all be collected together, but frankly, the undertaking of a director, a senior planner, and a planner working with local municipalities and county council to develop one official plan to replace 11 was a tall order, which was required by the province of Ontario. And that was delivered and adopted by county council. So that's a quick background, but they still are official plans which guide and direct the growth of those 3 serviced urban areas of Listowel, Mitchell, and Milverton.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rothwell, for that history. It's valuable. So again, I invite you to stretch or move whatever you need to do. We're gonna get into land divisions. Don't be afraid to get some blood flow. We're gonna cover land division, then we're gonna cover planning policy, and then we'll get into some questions.
You want to say like 5 minutes or 10 minutes?
Sure, why don't we do 5 minutes in case someone needs a bio break? So we'll start again at 7:35.
Yeah.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Thanks for your attention so far. We're over halfway through the slides and we're gonna get into land division. So in Perth County, there's two methods of creating lots, plans of subdivision, and condominium, which isn't quite a reference to lots, but, and the consent process. The approval authority for both is county council. And as I mentioned earlier, we circle around first to the lower tier to find out what insights and things we need to learn there before the decision is made at the upper tier. So we're going to talk about subdivision and condominium first. I'm not going to go too deep into this, but I wanted to give you a sense of what we're talking about. So subdivisions are generally used if we're creating more than 5 lots at a time. It can be for neighborhood uses, it could be for employment uses. There's various things you might subdivide land for. And within a subdivision, in this picture here, you can see it's residential lots essentially with a street block in the middle. But in subdivisions, you can have what we call lotless blocks. So you could find in a subdivision application that maybe where it's represented on this photo as lot 17, 18, 19, 20, maybe that didn't have any lot lines in it. And that would be a lotless block. So it's intended for in this case, it would be residential development, but subdivisions progress over a number of years, generally speaking. And so sometimes the developer wants to be able to anticipate and pivot based on market demands at the time for different forms of housing. So in that case, we would learn about this application as a range of this many units to this many units. And that will unfold as this lotless block becomes more known at the time of development. So in the case of a subdivision, just like the other applications, we would have a pre-consultation. They would lay out for us what they're planning, and we would offer them feedback on what information we're going to need to properly evaluate this subdivision. And at the end of the day, generally what we're looking for is that the land is suitable for the purposes that it's being proposed to be used for, that there's conformity with the PPS, the official plan, generally the zoning bylaw, and other provincial legislation. So that sort of wholesome list of different statutes that might be applicable. And what we're considering also is the services, what capacity is available within the services, how will services be outlined. We're looking at water, sewer, stormwater, roads. In that instance, we're looking for, in this example, there's not a stormwater management block, but sometimes in a subdivision, you're going to see an area blocked out for the retention of stormwaters in the form of a pond. We're looking for parks or park provisions. We're looking for connectivity between subdivisions throughout the neighborhood for both vehicle access and pedestrians or cyclists. And we're looking for different forms of housing if it's a residential development. And we're also looking for compatibility with neighboring uses. So that's not always just a matter of how close is this going to be. We had one recently, I believe it was Susanna's, where the street block was a concern for one of the neighbors just based on some historical stuff that they have close to their lot line that's underground. So that was some insights that they brought forward at a public meeting. But also, for instance, it might be a residential subdivision proposed within the certain distance of an industrial park or a commercial area. And so we want to make sure that those uses are going to be able to coexist without creating a stream of complaints for the folks that are trying to live in the new units or the people who are trying to run businesses nearby. And if that does happen, it's going to, fall on municipal staff to deal with those complaints. So we're really trying to make sure that things are well planned, that design is part of this so that things can coexist in a relatively compatible fashion. When a subdivision gets an approval, it's referred to as draft approval, and we give them 5 years to fulfill a list of conditions. Typical conditions would be an agreement of subdivision with the municipality that outlines all of the different provisions for curbing or stormwater, different securities that need to be posted along the way, parkland fees, all kinds of things in a subdivision agreement. This is where we would capture conditions for perhaps road improvements leading into the subdivision. That's come up in one of the subdivisions that's unfolding right now. And so those would be conditions coming to us from an agency, whether it's the local public works or MTO perhaps. And we would learn about things like that through the study. So if we're talking about road improvements, it was likely a traffic impact study. If we're talking about compatibility, it was probably a study around noise or vibration or dust. If we're talking about services, then we would have received a functional servicing report and their servicing plans for all of the different services and stormwater management. So in reviewing the applications, we start to draft the different conditions. And then at that draft approval stage, then the developer knows all of the things that they're going to need to do within that 5 years in order to be able to take that plan of subdivision that they've outlined and actually register it. So when they have fulfilled their conditions, they send them to us in one package and we review and cross-reference, and we also talk with the lower tiers or various agencies that may be the clearance agency for different conditions. It's not always the planning department that's clearing conditions. Sometimes it's the different divisions or departments at a lower tier or the MTO or Conservation Authority. There's various agencies that we would look for confirmation that whatever had been outlined was achieved. And then they would bring us the plans. So the actual M plan is going to get registered at the Ontario Land Registry, and we're going to match it up with what was intended. We're going to learn if the lotless blocks have a plan yet, or if they're going to be come back to us at a future application for, another subdivision or a severance application. And then we cross-reference all those conditions, and then the approval for the final plan is delegated to staff. And so then I sign off on those and they go to land registry, and then those lots are then created. And then addressing happens along the way. And then it goes to MPAC for roll numbers, and then it comes back around. And in the interim, once those lots are registered, then building permits can be issued. So subdivisions are a very interesting type of development. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of folks involved. And so when we bring you recommendations on a subdivision, we're going to try to give you the Coles notes of all of like what sort of has been captured in the conditions. You're going to see them in full text. And you're going to hear from the developer that they've reviewed the draft conditions, that they understand them, etc. Condominium development is very similar process. The review process similar, the registration process is similar, the conditions is similar. The difference being that in a condominium, the different units that can be, or the different, it's not different lots that will be owned. It will be a specific unit within a building or on a lot. And so within that ownership structure, there's also shared components, usually things like corridors, lobbies, parking lots, elevators, that kind of thing. And in that case, we're also looking for the agreement among the condominium owners to make sure that certain parameters that are of interest to the municipality are also captured in there. So the process for condominiums is quite similar to subdivisions. Before we move on from here, is there any questions about this form of land division? Anybody online? Okay, well, if one pops up, we'll circle back. So next up is consents. A consent is commonly known as a severance, and we use that terminology sometimes too, but as the name implies, it's actually just the consent to go and create the lot. It's not the severance itself. So a consent application is essentially a request for permission to create a lot or to change the configuration of where the lot line exists. We call that a lot addition. You need a consent for easements. and you need consent for a mortgage over a portion of a property or a lease that has a term that's longer than 21 years. And that could be inclusive of various renewals along that 21-year period or 21+ year period. So there's various things that a property owner might need consent for, is the point really. The two pictures that we've got up here are showing lot creation in this before and after here. We have this lot with some open space. They want to create a lot line up the center and which would allow for development on the second lot as well. So they come seeking consent to create this lot line. Similar to the subdivision process, they lay it out for us in a surveyor sketch. We review it. We have a public engagement portion. We provide a recommendation and a decision is made, which is a draft approval. And it's conditional upon usually a dozen, anywhere from sort of 6 to a dozen conditions. And those conditions are things that we have gathered from the staff at the lower tier in the different departments and some county interests as well, or agencies. And then they fulfill those conditions. They submit the package. Michelle reviews it, and Michelle, as the land division secretary, actually issues what is called a certificate of official, and they can take that to the land registry office and create the parcel as per the reference plan that they've provided us. And those reference plans have already been vetted at the land registry for technical components and make sure it's all noted. The other picture here is for a lot addition. So in this case, we have a lot A that's fairly large and lot B that's kind of tiny. But the person on lot B would like to build an addition on this building, but they simply don't have the room. So their neighbor has agreed to sever a portion of their property and add it to their lot. So then the result being that lot B becomes bigger and lot A becomes smaller and the lot line is moved. So the reason for this may be many things. It may be for servicing, it may be for like a septic system or a geothermal system or what have you, or an addition. There's various reasons why someone may need this type of consent. The planning approval or the planning authority for consents is the land division committee. So again, it's a slight change from subdivisions and official plan amendments. Land division committee is a subset of county council. So it's 5 councilors from those county seats. And again, we go around to the lower tier first to seek input there so that land division committee has the information they need about local insights or priorities that need to be considered at the decision-making stage. When we come to the lower tiers, we're again looking for a resolution that includes or lays out the opinions of the local council. And so even if all of the issues or concerns haven't been resolved at that stage, you can note that in the resolution. So for example, if there's a consent that you'd like to see go through, you think it's good for the community, in your opinion, it sort of reflects the goals and values in the official plan. But there's one thing about it that you're not too excited about, like you think the lot line should be like a little bit closer to this lot B, for instance, then in that resolution from the lower tier, you could simply say, recommend to land division committee that that this lot addition be approved with the lot line moved over 0.5 meters or whatever. Like, it's an opportunity for the lower tier to express what it is about the consent application that is attractive or supportable, and what about it could be better in their view. So a resolution like that allows the application to continue through the process and for the lower tiers recommendations to be made with the planner's recommendations and any comments from the public to that decision-making body. There is also a process for severances or consents, I should say, for those that are undisputed. So what we mean by that is a consent application that really doesn't have any strong concerns or issues attached to it. So if a planning application for consent is being recommended by the planner for what was applied for, no modifications, and the lower tier council is also recommending approval of what was applied for, and there are no unresolved concerns from the public, then that consent doesn't require, Perth County anyway, a public hearing or discussion at the land division committee. If it's really simply just aligned with all the policies and everyone's in agreement, then I can actually sign off on that one. The manager of planning can approve those kinds of consent applications. And it removes a little bit of time from the process. It's one of the things that county council implemented a couple of years ago to sort of streamline the process for certain application types. And with all these applications that we've reviewed, minor variances, zoning bylaws, official plan amendments, subdivisions, and consents, when a decision is made by the approval authority, a notice is circulated. It's not necessarily circulated back to all the neighbors, but to anyone who requested notice, it's circulated to the lower tier or the upper tier, as the case may be, depending on who made the decision, you circulate the other, and various prescribed agencies. So the notice goes out into the applicant. And one of the things that can occur after a decision is made is an appeal on any of these types of planning applications. So we haven't talked too much about appeals, but I will bring it up a little bit later and we can talk about it then. So that gets us through the two types of land division in Perth County and basically how they operate. We're going to talk a little bit about site plan control next. It's not a very flashy slide, I apologize. But site plan control is a tool in planning that's used for detailed and specific functioning of a site. So it applies to every type of land use in Perth County, and that's been enacted through site plan control bylaws at each of the lower tiers. There are exemptions, however. So site plan control doesn't apply to low density housing. It doesn't apply to agricultural buildings and structures or aggregate operations. But everything else, commercial, industrial, high density, residential, those types of things would have a site plan control process. It's a review of things like access for pedestrians, accessibility in parking, walkways, lighting, landscaping, waste facilities, all of these kinds of things that happen outside of the buildings, getting in and out of the site. And it's really an opportunity for different agencies or the departments at the lower tier to make sure that the site's going to function and it's going to be connected adequately to servicing, and that there won't be issues with how the site is working after the fact. This is not a public process, so there's not a circulation to neighbors and there's no public meeting. And more recently, the province delegated authority away from councils or committees to staff. So at each of the lower tiers, there is a staff member who has the authority for approving these site plans. And the approval comes in the form of an agreement with the landowner to do all of the things that are outlined in the plan. And then the agreement is registered on title. So that plan is always adhered to. And the parameters of the agreement are always known to both parties. This one's probably most sort of near and dear to local staff because there's a lot of involvement there. And it's the one that, like zoning, that really leads to building permits and activity in the municipality. So, again, if there's questions here, let me know. I don't see anything online there, but we can always circle back. I just wanted to bring this slide up again, just as a reminder that the process unfolds. And for the most part, I think the public thinks that it begins and ends with phase 2. And it's just simply not the truth. This part before an application is made and the implementation after are really important because they take time and they cost money, both of those, phase 1 and phase 3. So we want to be really clear with folks that there's responsibilities here by the developer and responsibilities here by the developer. And we want to be transparent as we can be about what those things include. And perhaps here is where we could talk a little bit about appeals. So a decision is made by the approval authority, and it could be appealed by the applicant, it could be appealed by I want to say neighbor, but there was some changes in the Planning Act as of today that will change that a little bit, or agencies or the province itself can appeal. And what that means is that the decision is not in full force and effect until the appeal has been resolved. So that could take the form of a negotiation, it could take the form of a hearing. It really depends on the circumstances of the application and who's appealing and what grounds they're appealing on, or what's the reason for the appeal. So at any given point in time, we have a couple of appeals in process around the county as well. I'll just talk a little bit about public engagement. But before I do, it's happening around here. So during the review of an application is when we engage the public. And we do that through notices, as I've mentioned, to neighbors. And we also hold public meetings for certain application types. So at the public meeting, the planner would review the application and all of the different characteristics of it, reserve a recommendation. So not get to that stage yet, but hear from the public, and the planning authority would run that public meeting. So whether that's the lower tier or the upper tier or the land division committee. And then you're going to hear from folks who are for the application and folks who maybe are against the application. Sometimes there's a lot of turnout. There was one recently where there was just, I don't know how many people would have been there, Susanna, but many. And sometimes like nobody shows. But
Usually nobody shows. One meeting we had about 30.
Yeah. But it's an important part of the process, and we do learn things that from neighbors that we maybe couldn't have learned any other way. So it's an important part of the land use process, because these decisions affect many people. So it's important to engage the public to ensure that they have the opportunity to express their goals or their desires or their values for their community. All right. So some of the ones that we talked about are listed here because they have a public component to them, in which case we have to give a certain, oops, I just hit, yeah. Bring me back to that. We're getting close here. Next one. Great, thanks. Okay, so there's a certain number of days required to give notice so that people have the opportunity to learn about the application, develop their opinions or thoughts, maybe seek some advice, and then participate. So it's different for each type of planning application. And the one that's not listed here is minor variance. There's a 10-day notice for minor variance public meetings. And then from the time that we receive an application and it has been deemed complete, because sometimes we get an application and it doesn't have all the parts that it's intended to have, in which case this timeline doesn't start. But once we have a complete application, we have 120 days, for instance, for an official plan amendment to have the full review completed, not conditions drafted for an official plan, but to have the public process completed and a decision made by the approval authority. For a plan of subdivision, we have 120 days as well, zoning bylaw 90 and consents 90. So within those number of days, you have to complete the review and conduct the public portion, the public engagement portion, and get to a decision by the approval authority. So again, within those number of days, we're going to the local council first. And so we do work with the different agendas and the different agenda schedules for all the four lower tiers, land division committee and the county council, to make sure that all of these things can happen within we call it the statutory timelines. And then once that decision notice is sent out, there's a 20-day period within which an appeal can be made. So if the appeal is made after that, it doesn't get lodged essentially. So they got 20 days to appeal a decision. The minor variance process is 30 days start to finish. So within, but by the time we get the application to a decision is 30 days, and there's a 10-day notice period within that. And as I mentioned, site plans don't have a public process, but we essentially have 30 days to figure out if those applications are complete, and 60 days for the review for a 90 days total. So this is from the Planning Act. It gives us guidance about the need to keep things moving and to cover all the parts as you go. That concludes our development review portion. We're going to talk briefly about policy development, which is the other function that our department provides. And then we're going to have a bit of time for questions for anyone who has them. Official plan and policy development, as I said, is another thing that our department provides. And we do so with reflection on the planning framework, the regime that we talked about. And so I've listed here some of the planning and land use principles that we use when we're developing policy. We certainly need to respect the constraints of the landscape. And a perfect example of that would be floodplains or erosion hazards. The other one would be source water protection zones. Those are a couple examples. Compatibility between land uses, which we've talked about. The capacity of infrastructure, this is really important. And planning for infrastructure over the longer term. We plan for land uses on a 25-year horizon, but when you're as councils making decisions about infrastructure, that's probably a 50 or a 75-year decision. So you want to know where things are heading in the planning direction so that we can be coordinated with those and other investments that you're making. We need to be efficient with land use. So we develop policies around intensification, and we also want to protect our natural resources. So there's policies around the efficient use of land in those settlement areas, because when you do that well, then you're reducing the pressure to have developments going out into the areas which have our prime ag lands, the aggregates, and the natural environment. Connectivity is a really important landing principle. We've talked about vehicle and pedestrian and cyclist traffic. And I just touched briefly on sort of knowing where you're going over the long term. You don't have to fill it within 25 years. In fact, we kind of hope that we can do a really good job of like intensifying as we go. But we really need to lay out what 25 years might look like so that we're prepared. And we can, and the development community can have a sense of where we're directing their types of developments to go. We want to be able to consider mixed uses when appropriate. There's a mixed use development proposed or sort of unfolding in North Perth, a couple in fact, and the ones we've seen more in Perth County so far is sort of a mix of commercial and housing on one lot or within one building. And complete neighborhoods where you can consider not only where people are going to live, but where are they going to buy food? Where are they going to access services for libraries, schools, hospitals, things like that? Just want to plan for all of these things. When we're developing policy, we try to keep all of these things in mind. So some of the policies that we're working on right now for the county and development over time is the new official plan. That's the big one. It's been underway for quite a while now, but we're getting very near to a complete draft. And once that draft is finished, we're going to spend the first part of the new year reviewing it with committees. There's a housing committee, a stakeholder focus group, a technical committee that's going to be made up largely from ministry staff. And then there's a steering committee, which is all the mayors and CAOs. There's going to be certain aspects of it that we come around to talk about specifically with the lower tier councils as well. And growth would be one of those things. So an ETA on that stuff is early in the new year for that committee work. Then we would go back to council, give them an idea of what revisions or feedback has come out of that committee work, and present to them a draft that we would recommend for public consultation. So all things going smoothly, we would hope to have public consultation in the middle of next year, and in various forms, webinars, perhaps field trip type where you can arrive at a site and learn something about the official plan at that site. Forums and the like. So once we go through consultation with the public, then again, we would make revisions to that draft and we would present them to council saying, here's the feedback that was received through public consultation. And here is the final draft that we present to you for adoption. And then subsequent to the adoption, it would go to the province for approval. And then once the province approves it, there'll be a sort of a round of modifications. And then once it's approved, then we can put it into force and effect. So while it's being reviewed at the province, we're going to start working on zoning bylaws because all of the zoning bylaws will need updated to some degree to match the updated policies in the official plan. So we're going to start working on those throughout 2023. And that brings us to site plan guidelines. We've had a few updates on these over the past year. The work of the planners have and working with lower tier staff as well as the accessibility committee and in improving those guidelines. I think there's some other options for improvements there as well that we could implement. We have some outreach materials, like we have a handout on additional residential units, and it shows what they look like in different forms, whether they're in the main building or outside the main building. We just really want to get that notion out there that it can look different in different places and invite people to consult with us about what it might look like on their property. It's an effective way to get more housing options and some more affordable or attainable options in the community is the additional residential units. And exemption from part lock control is another sort of planning process that I didn't really touch on today, but we recently put together some guidelines that we're sort of test driving right now. It's something, part lock control exemptions is a way of dividing land again, but it's not been a tool that's used real frequently, but it's becoming more and more so. So we wanted to beef up our knowledge about that. We've taken some training recently, and we wanted to build some guidelines so that we could be more, I guess, forthcoming with when is part lock control really going to work for a municipality, and therefore developers could use the tool more easily. And then the other thing that we have in process or drafted is some residential intensification guidelines, and we hope to be bringing those out in 2023 as well. The notion there being that design really is what makes, design is one of the main things that helps intensification work well. So,
Sally,
yeah.
could you explain what exemption from lot control is?
Sure. So you may have the most sort of probably easy to get off the hop example is a property that has a semi-detached building on it. And the owner of that property would actually like to sell those separately. So they want to create a lot line down the common wall in the middle of that semi. And then both of those new parcels could be separately conveyable. You could sell one or the other. And so instead of going through the consent process, they could seek an exemption to part lock control. So within a subdivision in Ontario, a whole lot cannot be conveyed in parts. And if they want to convey it in parts, there are certain circumstances where that is reasonable and acceptable. And in those cases, we would be providing them an exemption. And it's approved through a combination of a bylaw at the lower tier and then a review at the county by myself. And what we're really looking for is that it's going to be able to be implemented by the municipality with ease, and that it meets all the zoning provisions. Yeah.
Thank you.
So that's probably the easiest example I could offer. Okay. I've got two slides here with different references on it. And like I said, you're going to get these slides. So there's two screens with different opportunities. I just want to point out that there is planning training for elected officials offered by AMO. And there's a course there called Primary Planning. It's quite good. If you're just looking for some reading material on a specific type of application, these citizen guides that are produced by the province are quite helpful. Here we have the GIS for the county that you can access and look at all the different zones and properties around the county, and also our planning website where you can learn more about the new official plan. You can learn about the different application types and how to apply for them. You can learn about pre-consultation processes. There was a document put out a couple of years ago by AMO called Streamlining the Municipal Development Review Process. I quite like the document. There's a few outdated references in it, but it's quite good. I've put it on the second slide here, so I didn't cut off the thing. And then Bill 23 is something we haven't talked about very much tonight. There's some changes coming to the way we do planning. And they were proposed by the province not that long ago, like a month ago, and received royal assent this afternoon, as I understand it. So it's happening incredibly fast, and it will slightly change some of the things that I talked about today. A couple of the examples I could give you would be that the requirement for a public meeting on a subdivision would be no longer. And the other one that comes to mind is write it down. Site plan control. So today we use site plan control for any residential developments greater than 2 units. But this would remove that and move that threshold up to 10 units. So anything greater than 10 units would have site plan control. Some of the ones that affect the lower tiers, perhaps more, would be changes to development charges. And for all of us is changing how we interact with the conservation authority. So those are some of the highlights from Bill 23. And as I said, it's sort of a fast moving train with very recent changes. So I'm going to have to do a bit more digging there myself to just get fully up to speed with what happened today. And that brings us to the end of the things that we want to share with you. But it's a lot of things we covered, and I tried to give you a sort of a taste of each thing. But if I leave you with anything tonight, it's that we want to be approachable. So please call us when you have questions. If you want to understand the process better, we'd love to explain it. We never tire of talking about planning, as you can probably tell by tonight. And we really want to enable you to be engaged in the process and to really fully understand the role of the planning authority and our role as your advisors. So don't be afraid to reach out at any time. And if there's any questions, I invite the other planners as well to help me in any responses. Okay, so we have one question there. So one of you guys want to take this question about its complete application? Susanna, perhaps?
Sure. So the question is, how do we determine an application to be complete? So the process that Sally laid out, we start with a pre-consultation process, and in the pre-consultation, we are brainstorming what planning issues are relevant to that specific file. So we provide that correspondence to the applicant, and then they come back with their application and all the supporting studies that are required. So at that point, the planning department is circulating the application together with any supporting studies. So that might be a functional servicing report. It might be a noise compatibility study. It might include an environmental impact study, might include an archaeological assessment. So once we have received the complete application with the supporting studies, then we circle back to any of the municipal reviewers. So the municipal engineer is usually one of the reviewers. So we would look to any of our partners to review those applications, as well as the planning department, and determine if we have all the studies needed in order to review the application and develop a recommendation for council. So the requirement for determining an application to be complete is planning staff in consultation with the municipal reviewers and any external reviewers.
We do that with a letter. So we cross-reference what we told them in the pre-consultation. Again, we check for anything that might have changed since then or differences in what they're proposing from what we originally talked about. And then we issue a letter to them. So it's essentially the planners who deem an application complete with the help of those other folks in different agencies or departments. And then we give them the applicant a letter and say your application complete so that they know when the clock starts on those 120 days or 90 days.
Just to add to that, thanks, Sally. Just add to that, we have 30 days once we receive an application to deem it either complete or incomplete.
Yeah.
That's it.
And if it's incomplete, we have to tell them what's missing.
And generally, the larger or more complicated the application, the more of that timeline we take. So something, we don't like to say any application is straightforward because you never know what's going to come up. But if we get something like a minor variance or severance, that might only take us a couple of days to kind of circle back around to staff and figure out what we need. But something like a plan of subdivision, an official plan amendment, that might take us the entire 30 days, just figuring out, like going through all the studies, identifying any potential issues that other agencies had. So it's quite the process, and it's something we take very seriously.
The other part of this question is about providing a report on the implications of Bill 23. So thanks for the question, Mike. I have circulated some information to the CAOs when it came out, just offering some resources on how to fully appreciate what all the things are that are in there, because it's not just straight up planning or development review stuff in there. But now that it seems to be a reality, there's going to be implementation, and I certainly need to put my mind to that and then inform our colleagues at the lower tiers as well on how planning processes will be affected and what implementation items we're going to need to shift in order to follow these changed processes. Yeah.
So you mentioned the consent for severance, some of those where everyone agrees there's no issues. Do us as council see all of those? I know perhaps whether it's on a consent agenda or is there just too many that doesn't matter, or
you'll see everyone that's in your municipality. So the planner will bring it as a report on your regular council meetings, and it'll be under the planning portion of the meeting, not in the consent agenda. It'll come under planning reports. So they're going to review every one of those, because one of the criteria is that the local municipality, that council there would like to see it approved as applied for without modification. Yeah. So you guys see the lower tiers sees every application in their municipality. Yeah. Anybody else?
As far as the official plan and by mid next year, is there an idea of how you'll engage the public?
We have considered a story map as one method. It's where you could interact with the map, and along the side, it would tell you the different things that you're seeing as you zoom in and zoom out. The other thing I would like to do specific to the natural environment consultation is have a couple field trip sites where you would like almost like a car tour, if you've been on those, where you could arrive at a place and learn about how the natural environment policies and the ag policies will work together. But we would do it in the context of a place. We're also planning for webinars on theme areas. So we'll likely break the official plan down into probably 4 theme areas. So one on neighborhoods and housing, maybe jobs, that would be commercial and industrial policies, growth and intensification policies and growth management. And the other one would be the resources piece. So aggregates, agriculture, and natural environment. So I'd like to break it down into those themes so that people could sort of digest it in sections, and we could fully talk about, a set of policies on this type of land use. And then on a different day, we could talk about a different set of policies and different type of land use.
Okay, great. It's just from being, people don't engage that well. So are you going to send out a letter to their personal to their address, or
well,
so they're aware of that? Hey, there's an official plan going on right now. A lot of people don't know.
When we do some of that stuff, we'll probably put it in newspapers and out through social media to try and capture as many folks as we can. We've also been doing a consultation on natural environment specifically. That's sort of started already, and we're gonna have it roll concurrently throughout the rest of the development of the plan and the public consultation more generally. And for those, there was very specific changes for a certain number of landowners. So we actually sent them a letter directly. And we're working with that group of folks now. And we knew we would need more time for that. And we also need some time to like actually visit sites, which we're starting tomorrow. So we started it sooner. And in that case, there was a direct mailing to certain landowners. Yeah.
You touched on the GIS mapping. How is that going to be kept up to date? And I'm only using my property. I went on it, looked at it. We were a gravel pit. We got a lot larger in a gravel pit, and it's already out to date. And I haven't lived there that long.
Oh, do you mean the aerial imagery?
Yes, like through the map, I zoomed in, and
Yeah.
it's not as it should be. But it's not in live form, right? It's not.
No.
No.
The aerial photos on there, you can actually go back and look at them over time. Most recent are 2020.
I will look again.
And the designations and zones are also on there.
Yes.
There's a number of consolidations that we're updating right now that have happened over the last few years that we're trying to, since we've come sort of back to a single planning service, we need to get those updated. And the GIS is not the official location of a designation or a zone. That's within that schedule that I showed you, that big map. For an official plan, and for zoning, it's a key map, which is a map within the zoning bylaw itself. But we try to keep the GIS as up to date as possible. And there are a few things on there that are out of date at the moment. But it's generally a pretty good source for finding that info. Did you guys want to offer anything else about GIS that I didn't touch on?
I think it's a really good tool, and we're continuing to find new ways to use it. And I think that going forward, it's just going to help us consolidate things.
I
And
would love a world where it is the location of our designations in our zones. That would be amazing.
And I believe at the December 1st council meeting, you'll see a demonstration of GIS to celebrate GIS Day and some of the changes that have recently been made, which are incredible improvements. So you'll see an interactive map and be able to zoom into your property and such.
And we use it every day, and it's such a great tool for especially when you're in a pre-consultation with a landowner, like being able for them to kind of sit beside you and see, like say, oh, like this is what I'm thinking of. Because I try to think back in the day when they were using old maps and having to like go through, like it must have taken so much time. And
You can do measurements also. There are tools to measure like areas and raw stuff, like say, like you're looking to like a foot of building, like a buildable area, let's say on your property, like you can actually draw that up and see what can be done with a property like that. So they're like kind of like graphic tools as well.
you can create buffers and
Yeah.
see, for example, how far a water course is, add 300-meter buffer to that and see how far that goes towards your property and things like that.
especially minimum distance separation formula, it's so great for that. Sorry, should I? I'm assuming most people know what that is, so.
Do we have other questions from the online folks? Okay. Okay. Is there any questions still in the room? Well, as I said, don't be afraid to reach out. No question is a dumb question. We like all questions. And we really want to be a resource for you to engage in planning and understand it. And you'll get these references that we pointed out today as well. So you can look into any of those that might be of interest to you. And I'm just really grateful for you coming and learning a bit about it tonight. and having a real introduction into sort of the fundamentals and some of the planning 101 basics so that you can figure out what parts you want to learn more about, or as you go through the review of planning applications, and I think you're going to get some right off the hop for those of you that are new. Planning doesn't really stop, so there's something almost at every single council meeting that you'll be reviewing, trying to make decisions about. So ask lots of questions and we'll get you the answers as best we can. Okay. Thanks for all the folks online. Really appreciate your participation and interest. And safe travels home to those in the room. Oh, we have, oh, bye.
I feel like we should clap or something.
All right, take care, everybody.